Good morning, everyone. My name is Beth Wong, and I'm the director of the Massachusetts Voter Table. I'm a proud fiscal project of Third Sector New England Mission Works. It's so great to join you all on a very important topic, the 2020 census and how nonprofits can lead for greater racial equity in our communities for the next 10 years. So I have two amazing colleagues who are joining us today, and I'll have them introduce themselves.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jasmine Gomez. I use they, them, their pronouns. I work with Access Strategies Fund. I'm the program director there, and Access Strategies Fund is a foundation, and we work in collaboration with the Massachusetts Census Equity Fund. And I'll tell you all a little bit more about who the Massachusetts Census Equity Fund is later.
Hi, I am Vatsari Sivangsai. I am with MIRA, the Massachusetts Immigrants and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. We are the statewide Complete Count Committee Chair for Massachusetts and Census 2020.
Okay, fantastic. So we're actually going to, so how many of you have been thinking about 2020, about the election, about, yeah, sorry, I know. And what's incredible is 2020 is coming up in really just a month and a half. Sorry, everyone. And we have huge opportunities to make sure that our communities are represented and get the resources that they need in the 2020 census. And the 2020 census will have a profound impact on the future of our communities and our ability to have a reflective democracy for the next 10 years. And it's really important that all of our communities get all of the resources that they need. So to do a very short demonstration, how many of you have a piece of flip chart paper with the words healthcare, education, transportation, and affordable housing on your tables? Okay, if you don't have one on your table, go find someone who is raising their hand right now. We're going to do a short exercise using some Monopoly money to demonstrate what the impact of resource allocation is on our communities. So while I still have your attention, how many of you work with constituents, clients, or members of your base who struggle with access to quality health care or struggle to afford quality health care? How many of you work with folks who struggle to ensure that their kids receive a quality education? How many folks know that your folks are, how many people in this room know that your people are constantly struggling, waiting for the T, waiting for buses, waiting for good public transportation? Or have their cars damaged by roads with potholes? And yes, I see Trina, you in the back, enthusiastically raising your hand. Absolutely. And then how many people in this room know folks who are struggling to get affordable housing? Yes. Yep. Almost every hand in the room goes up. Okay, so we're going to take just a few minutes to look at the amount of money that it would take to fully fund something. So every person who is counted in the 2020 census represents $2,500 for their communities every year for 10 years. And so while the money isn't real and the numerical amounts aren't quite right, this is about the amount of money that is needed per person for these types of vital programs and services in our communities. And so we're going to take just a couple of minutes to decide with the Monopoly money, that the Simpsons Monopoly money that's at your tables, what you would do with the amount of money that you have, knowing how much it takes in federal funds to fully fund a service. So we're just going to take a couple of minutes. I'll remind you when you've got 5 minutes. Yep. So, yep, that's how much money you have total, and then that's the amount of services and programs that are needed in your community, and how much it takes to fully fund it. Okay, it's looking like most tables are about done. So let's come back together and do a little bit of show and tell of how you decided to use your funds. So when folks report back, if you could say how much money you had total and what you decided to do with it. So should we start with this table?
Yeah, thank you. They chose me because I'm looking at it all upside down. So we had $1,500 to apportion through these 4 priorities. We fully funded affordable housing, sort of deciding that was, if that need was fully met, then, we could kind of spread the rest of it a little thin. So we put $500 to healthcare, $100 towards transportation, and $400 to education. But then we took money from the defense budget. Yes. To make up the difference in healthcare, education, and transportation. And then we made fuzzy dollars too, which was really cute. And then we also talked about how if we were fully meeting affordable housing, then there's a health dimension to that. There's also a connection. Well, there's a connection between everything, but that healthcare and education can be closely linked. And that if affordable housing was in the right place, transportation costs could go down. So that's how we tried to make the most of our limited resources.
And what was the total amount of money that we gave you? $1,500. Yep. Okay, so I will just maybe move clockwise, counterclockwise.
We were given $2,500. Oh, sorry, $2,150 out of $2,500, $2,150. So we had some greater resources, and we funded affordable housing for, it was fully funded. Transportation came in a little under. Education was $750 out of $800, and healthcare was about $850, although we were thinking if we could have broken down some of our bills more, we might have shifted a little more towards transportation. And we also said we were going to take some money from the military budget.
Wide consensus in this room.
So we had about $2,000. We thought a lot about this also because we have some healthcare professionals in the room. We wanted to fully fund healthcare because we think it's a high burden to individuals and families, and because of that out-of-pocket payment that we're paying, it's going to affect their ability to pay for a lot of the other pieces that we're talking about. So we fully funded $1,000 for healthcare, but we realized that all of the rest is going to suffer, so we tried to do it in percentage-wise. But if we cut so much from transportation, that's going to affect the ability to have the affordable housing. So we were having to do about $150 to transportation and only $350 to affordable housing, which we have been wrestling with because we don't think that's right. And we can only give $500 to education, which we understand that's we need some military budget.
Yes, definitely.
All right, so in our town, it would have taken $2,500 to fund everything fully, and we had $1,800 to work with, so a little over half. We fully funded affordable housing, which is kind of on trend with everyone else. And then we tried to fund the other ones at about like half to 3/4, so we gave $700 out of $1,000. Is that right? Yeah. $700 out of $1,000 to healthcare, $500 out of $800 to education, and $100 out of $200 to transportation. But now, with 2020 ahead, we're like, Bernie Sanders might win, so then we don't have to worry about education or healthcare anymore.
Or at least our nonprofits wouldn't have to worry about healthcare, right?
We had $2,500, so we fully funded everything.
Makes things easy, right? Okay, and then I'll pass. Who wants it from this table?
Come to me. We had $1,200, and it wasn't really enough to do much with. Yeah.
Yes, so it's very hard when about 50% of your people get counted. Is there anyone in this room who lives in Roxbury, Dorchester, or Mattapan? Okay, John does, okay. Some other folks do. There are some census tracts in Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan where the self-response rate on the 2010 census was 51%. Right, so that's actually like you get $1,200 out of your $2,500 because we know that when people fill out the census, they also cover their households, they tell their neighbors and more, and it's very different for community members to decide to respond to the census themselves than to have someone knock on their door. And when our communities are undercounted, then policymakers make these kinds of whack decisions about our communities and what they deserve. So that's why the census matters so much. And I think at this point I'm going to hand it over to Vatsity to give us much more concrete information about why the census is important.
Thank you, Beth. So my name is Vatsity Sivangsai, and I work at Mira, but lately we've been talking much more about census because of the 2020 coming up. And as I'm listening to you, I hear a lot of other conversations that have been happening across the state, and that's really about what is being impacted by the census numbers. You know, what are the things that our community needs now, and how will, after 2020, our community be affected? So as you were doing that, I saw some creativity, printing or developing your own money, taking it from other government budget programs. And I see a lot of discouragement as well, not wanting to, not feeling that we have enough money for our programs. So I just want us to reflect a little bit about the first topic, which is public education and Head Start. So just a little bit of tidbit. In Massachusetts in 2010, we missed about 20,000 children under the age of 5. Across the nation, it was more than 1 million. So if you're looking at the numbers that you're looking at now, if you get fully funded at $2,500 times 10 years, that's really impactful, especially for a Head Start program, especially for education. So I just want to take a moment to talk about what do you think are the other programs that are affected if we don't get an undercount, but if we get a full count, what are the benefits that we can see? And anyone, this can be popcorn. Absolutely. Title I for low-income students. I saw someone else over here. Mm-hmm. Yep, the breakfast program, the lunch programs that happen in our schools. Is anyone else? About our children with disabilities, right? So special education. And oftentimes we don't talk about special needs students because not a lot of us are affected by that program. In Massachusetts, the money follows the student, right? So if our children don't have the resources for within the schools, that money follows into the private schools that can provide those special education for our students. So what's really important when we're thinking about the census and counting is, do those schools know that they need to count the students where they're at or where their parents live? Some students will be counted where the facilities are, and that's an administrative count. Other students will be counted at their parents' home. So those are the questions that we should think about as we're thinking about how do we do outreach into our community to ensure that our students are getting counted so that their education, early ed education, are more funded than they are now. Public transportation and roads and bridges. I know this is not as shocking, but still affects us deeply. I came back from Japan just in August, and my 4-year-old son loves watching trains. And we just rode on the rocket in Japan, right? And it was smooth. He loved it. And when, when we were ready to go the other way, the seats automatically turned, and then the people just positioned the other way. Then he said, "Okay, Mommy, can I watch the trains on YouTube?" So I said, "Okay." So we watched the trains, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, the orange line, we have a new train." So I was like, "Here, you can watch it." And he's like, "Oh, Mommy, the train's on fire." All right, so that's our situation now. What are other transportations and public and private transportations that are affected by the census? What is it? Housing? Oh, housing? Transportation does affect housing. Yeah, if you have to take public roads, if you're not close to an MBTA bus line or the train, you're going to rely on the roads. Yeah, the rides for the folks, and as you may already hear, some elderly folks and some folks with disability are now taking Ubers, which, as we know, is very detrimental to our environment. They probably are not getting there much faster, right? So that's going to affect everything: our health, our ability to create better systems, whether they're those buses or whether it's our MBTA. One more?
Federal funds pay for the maintenance of our roads. They also pay for building new roads. They also pay for a lot of actually bike paths, bike trails, bike lanes.
Yeah.
A lot of most things related to roads.
That's right. Yeah, so paying for the roads. Another example is that often designers, policymakers take census data to determine where new roads are going to be made, right? And whether they're private roads or public roads, this data is super important, especially since we're thinking about our rails. Where should the rails go based on our population? How are low-income folks affected? Because there's not enough MBTA, there's not enough buses for our elderly or disabled community. Another topic is affordable housing and stable communities. So I heard a lot of you position affordable housing as a priority. What are some of the government programs that rely on census data? Section 8. Mm-hmm. Low income. That's right, alternative housing voucher programs. So one of the challenges for the census is really here in Massachusetts, there are a couple when we look at housing, right? We have a lot of density here in Roxbury, here in metro areas, and some of our affordable housing are managed privately. We need to ensure that our private landlords are part of this conversation, that they know that they are very critical to spreading the message about each individual in this house born before April 1st at 11:59.59 p.m. counts, right? And if they need help messaging, if they need ideas, these are some things that you can be helpful with. Data for redistricting and edible representation. What does that mean? Right. Yep.
And the question of whether people are counted where they're incarcerated or where they're from before they're incarcerated.
Right. So in Massachusetts, folks who are incarcerated are counted at the facilities that they are incarcerated. So they will be counted at the town or the city of that facility. And again, it is more of an administrative count. So that means that lead administrator will designate a person to count the individuals that are staying in that facility on April 1st. All right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. I don't have the answer to that, and that is a really great answer. I can ask the Census Bureau to provide us an answer for that, because it does seem unfair. I mean, an individual can be incarcerated just a few days or a few months, right? And so how are those individuals, when they're receiving the services at their home in another city with their families, why are they counted in a different place, right? And it's not their self-determination to actually be in the place that they're at on April 1st. So that is a great question. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. We agree, I think. Yeah. So redistricting starts in 2021, the year after the census. In past years, we have lost a congressional seat, and that was in Western Massachusetts. We are not projected to lose a seat in Massachusetts. There are about 12 other states that will be affected. They will either lose or gain seats, but Massachusetts will not as far as congressional seats. But what can be affected is our local government. Right? So for cities especially cities that have a really high immigrant population, because everyone counts, right? It does not matter what your immigration status is or what your citizenship status is. You count because you need the services and the resources while you're living here in the United States, in your community, with your families. So for those communities that can possibly have a higher count, Roxbury with the 51, right? Everett, Lawrence, Worcester, all of those communities can actually change in 2021. So as we're thinking about whether our community counts for 2020, think about how our community will be counted in the 10 plus years going forward, and that how our voices will matter in our representation here in local government. Okay. Are there any other examples that you would like to add before we wrap up? Great, so I'll pass it on to my colleague.
Thank you. Sorry about that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the logistical parts of the census, the operations, some less of this more understanding of the importance of it and more understanding how it works. So first things first, this year is going to be the first year where the census is going to be self-response. Typically, you have government officials, who we call enumerators, come to the doors, knock on your doors, ask you to fill out the census. They take the information back. This time around, you have to either call or go online with information that is mailed to you. And that's how you'll fill out the census. So there's going to be significantly less enumerators this time around than there previously were. And the enumerators are really only going to be going to your doors if you haven't been responding to the census. So just to kind of give folks some key dates moving forward. So March 12th is when some of those flyers will start being sent out to the houses. And you don't have to memorize all of this information. The Census Bureau and a lot of different nonprofit organizations have kind of created different timelines for the census, some of them more visual than this. So if folks, learn more visually, then there's other opportunities to kind of get that information. So March 12th is when they start sending out the letters. March 30th through April 1st is when they're going to start doing service-based enumeration. And so basically what that means is for people who don't have a permanent address, people who are in transition, usually people without homes, they're going to be going to locations where those folks would typically show up so that they'd be able to count them. So we're talking about food pantries and different shelters for people without homes and things of that nature. On April 1st is actual census day. That's when people can take that information from that flyer and go online and fill out the census. Typically, it only takes 10 minutes. It's not a long survey, just a few questions, somewhere between 10 to 12 questions. It can get more complicated if you're filling out for an entire household because you're supposed to count every person in that household. April 9th through May 4th is enumeration of transitory locations. And I actually don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
So the enumeration of, so I just want to clarify that that there are multiple phases of how to participate in the census. So the first is self-response, which runs from mid-March to mid-May, and then after mid-May, if you haven't filled out the census yet, then enumerators will go around your neighborhood and knock on doors. And then some exceptions to that rule, and self-response again, used to happen by mail, but now it's happening mostly online or over the phone. And that's a cost-saving measure from the Census Bureau. So from April 9th through May 4th, the Census Bureau will prioritize going to outdoor shelters, to hotels and motels where a lot of people are living and who don't have a permanent address. And so this is a particular focus of the Census Bureau to count people who are not permanently housed at a location. And something that's important about both service-based enumeration and enumeration of transitory locations is that that actually happens with enumerators who are Census Bureau staff who have the paper form for the census. Everything else, other types of self-response happen online or over the phone.
So like Beth was saying too, there's different layers of non-response follow-up. I think they send up to 5 different flyers to your house, and then after that is when enumerators will start kind of going to tracts and areas where there's a lot of people who are not following up and being counted. So we just want to give a little bit of understanding around the census ecosystem and all of the different partners who are working to make sure that we're getting out the count. It's multi-layered. We have government-based examples from the federal to the state to the local, as well as nonprofit funding examples as well. So the Census Bureau is the federal agency that is working to get out the count. They're the ones that have that responsibility. It is a constitutional requirement to fill out the census, so this is the only agency that's actually required to be doing this work of getting the count out. There's also the Secretary of the Commonwealth. So here in Massachusetts, we're lucky that the Secretary of State has been active in wanting to make sure to get out the count. Other states, that's not the case. So in this space, we have gotten grassroots groups, a lot of work that Beth has done to advocate for grant funding to actually go through the Secretary of State's office. So they will be issuing grants, and they also created the statewide Complete Count Committee. So the statewide Complete Count Committee, just for folks who don't know of Complete Count Committees, it's basically a bunch of different kinds of people. Some are service-based people, some are nonprofit leaders, some different representatives who all come together during different periods of time to kind of talk about their strategies to make sure that the community is counted. And so on the statewide level, it's representative of a bunch of different regions as well as a bunch of different industries and communities. The also local level, so some different cities are making sure to appoint people who are working at the city to do census outreach and to do census work, and some local cities themselves too are creating complete count committees. So here in Boston, we've been really fortunate. The city itself has been giving out grants. It gave out a round of grants funding for nonprofits as well as having complete count committee. So nonprofit organizations, there's a huge variety of nonprofit organizations who are doing a lot of incredible work to get out the count. And I think Beth is doing a lot of amazing work with mass counts, and I want you to talk a little bit about mass counts.
The way that we will achieve a complete count in the 2020 census is when people hear about the importance of the census from many people who they trust. That could be a nonprofit organization that provides vital services in their daily lives. It could be a faith leader. It could be an elected official who they trust. It could be one of their friends who got one of those Census Bureau jobs that start at $25 per hour. It could be a whole number of different people. But at Mass Counts, we're preparing and mobilizing nonprofit organizations to be the trusted messenger in the 2020 census. In this political climate of fear and distrust of the federal government, you all have a very special and unique relationship with people who feel underrepresented and under-resourced in the political and economic system. And so it really is nonprofits that will play a very critical role in validating the importance of the 2020 census and its long-term impact.
Thank you. And that's actually, so we really truly believe that nonprofits, the trusted messengers, are going to be one of the biggest players in this, and that's why the Mass Census Equity Fund was created. And I'll get to you in just a second. The Mass Census Equity Fund, just so folks know, is a collaboration of funders and some grassroots groups, and we collectivize resources. We've given now 2 rounds of grants. We're in the process of giving the second one. So unfortunately, we don't have any more grant giving in the future, but what we do have is deep connection with all of these different people within the ecosystem, as well as a website, which we're going to put up later, with a ton of resources with all of the grantee groups that we've been working with. But just wanting to echo what Beth was saying too, these communities who have been undercounted the most, a lot of the reasons for that undercounting is distrust, and we'll talk a little bit more deeply about that in the next slide. And so to hear from multiple people the importance of it is going to make it much more likely that they'll be comfortable filling out. So I know like some grassroots groups might be doing work here and some government groups might be doing work here, and there might be some overlap. That's amazing. And as much overlap and as much continued collaboration that we can get, I think the more successful the Get Out the Count efforts will be. What was your question?
Maybe you're about to get to this, but do you have resources and messaging to share with communities who have really low levels of
Yeah, so a lot of our grassroots groups for the first round have been working on different pieces of educational material. I know Mass Counts has been, and Mira has been working, a lot of the people in the statewide complete count committees as well as the local complete count committees have been doing that type of work. And so we do have a resource page that we put up at the end that will kind of, point you to like hubs of where a lot of that material lays. And feel free to reach out to me at any point for specific information. I'm happy to send it your way, for sure. Do you have a question?
And out of a sense of, I'm sorry, it's so loud, I don't need a microphone. Our experience was, well, I won't bother with the details, was that people who didn't speak English well, but due to cultural norms about politeness and not offending authorities, would give the best answers that they could. How can people feel that if you have limited English proficiency?
Absolutely.
How do you do it online? I
Yep.
mean, how do you do it at all?
Yeah, so just like in the past with the written versions, they had multiple different languages. This time on the written one, they only have 2 main languages, but in terms of filling it out online or calling in, there's actually a lot of different languages. The Census Bureau, I think census specialists kind of looked up some of the top languages in the United States that are spoken, and I don't think it's going to cover every language. I mean, I know for a fact it won't cover every language, but there is a big number of languages that will be covered on the phone.
So, as Jasmine said, the form itself will be in Spanish and in English. So the Census Bureau did identify 12 non-English languages that will be online or over the phone. So when you go online, you pick the language and then the rest of the process will be in that language. Online, there's a designated language phone line. So when that person calls, the person on the other line will speak that language. Now, if you're from a community like myself, I'm Lao, that's not going to be part of the 12 languages, right? Khmer is not going to be part of the 12 languages because those populations, because this is a national look at, what do our populations speak across the nation. Here in Massachusetts, there are going to be some languages that aren't going to be at that 12, but there are 59 glossaries in addition to Braille and large print that is a step-by-step guide of how to answer the questions. And those are available online. And again, like if you would like quick access to that with a link, you can email Jasmine or Beth or I, and we can send you that link because sometimes it can be difficult, well, not difficult, but challenging to go through the census government website to find it.
My question is about, is there a model for organizations or groups that serve communities that speak languages that are not part of the included group of non-English, where they can actually do the count, where the organization is the enumerator and can actually implement the count for the community? Are there models? Is that part of the process?
So 2020 is quite different from the other years. Not only is it going to be the first time that it's online, but because of the underfunding, there will not be enough staff for the Census Bureau to have their questionnaire centers that they had before. So the questionnaire centers before were places that the public could go in and ask about the census and also sit there with a person guided going through it. So those, in the past, we could refer our residents to those questionnaire centers. This year, and as Beth mentioned and Jasmine, nonprofits are very critical because I'm asking you to have a questionnaire center, right? You cannot physically fill out the form for the person, but you can sit there and go through the guides with them. Even if language is a barrier, you have those 59 glossaries. You may need to train your staff or get volunteers. Think about, how will you set up the space? The Census Bureau said that they're going to have mobile questionnaire centers, meaning if you need the census taker to come to your location to kind of guide through that, for them to bring the laptop or bring the tablet, they will do that. But again, just think about how it's underfunded. So I wouldn't lean too much on that. I would look at what we have here as our capacity. I would, when the grants come out in the next couple of months, to apply for those grants through the Secretary of Commonwealth, because that money could go towards your initiative.
And one other model for ensuring that people who don't speak one of those 12 non-English languages or English is to get some of your people who speak one of those one of those languages that is not part of those 12 languages, right, to work for the Census Bureau that is actually the most, I think that is one of the most effective ways to ensure that your people who don't speak one of those 12 languages and don't speak English well to get counted. So I know that I will shout out the Cambodian Mutual Assistance Association in Lowell, which has done a phenomenal job recruiting one of their own board leaders to be one of the partnership specialists who speaks Khmer, and then that person now is recruiting other people from their community, from their Cambodian community in Lowell, to work for the Census Bureau as enumerators. And so I think that in addition to setting up all of the resources in your office, especially if you have computers on site, another extremely effective way of getting out the count in a community that otherwise will likely go undercounted is to get your own people to work for the Census Bureau who have the dual language ability.
Did anybody else have any questions? Great questions, by the way.
I usually don't need this. And to remove obstacles from the folks that we work with, it would be easier. I'm afraid that they might just throw them out.
Yes, so the sample questionnaire has been released. I believe there are 9 questions on it, and you definitely can Google sample 2020 census form, and it absolutely will pop up on the Census Bureau's website. It's also at 2020census.gov, and I think it's really important to share what those questions are because there are so many scams that target immigrants, low-income people, and elders that it is really important to familiarize yourself with the questions that will actually be on the census form so that you can tell people what they should expect and what they shouldn't expect. You should never have to fill out your social security number. You should never fill out your credit card number, your bank number, or any of that type of financial information to fill out the 2020 census. So yes, you absolutely can find the sample form very readily available online. No. So you need to fill it out at 2020census.gov. Yes, online or call in. Yep.
Yeah, there's no, not calling for the hard copy. There's really deeply limited hard copies. I think it's just with like some of the enumerators who are going to like some of these transitory locations and the service-based enumeration locations. So I think the vast majority is going to have to be online or on the phone. Is there any other? Yeah. I'm going to just briefly talk about confidentiality because this is a really important part, and I think we're running a little bit low on time, and then I'll open up for just a couple questions after confidentiality. But feel free to come up to me at any point after if you have any specific questions that we don't get to by the end of this. So for confidentiality, I kind of want to give a little bit of context and then background before I talk about this. So just some context. We have a lot of communities that we're servicing that are deeply distrustful of the government. And that's a really large reason why a lot of people are afraid to fill out the census. It's not the only reason, but especially for communities of color and immigrant communities, there's this fear that if we give the government information, they're going to use that information not to benefit us, not to fund these services, but actually to come after us or harm us. And so I want to just kind of give some background because that fear is rooted in truth in some of the history of the census use, and also want to talk about how that's changed from back then to today. So in the 1940s, during World War II, the United States was engaging in creating what they call, what we now call Japanese internment camps. And so we would take Japanese Americans from their houses, from their jobs, and bring them into internment camps, concentration camps. We brought about 120,000 Japanese Americans into these kind of camp centers. And how they were able to find out where folks lived was because of census information. So this is something that was really deeply detrimental to the census and to the security of the census. A lot of groups really advocated before the following census that there need to be deep changes because this is a constitutional requirement, and if we didn't have privacy, people aren't going to fill it out. And so we would be not fulfilling our constitutional requirement. So they created Title 13, which is a protection for the confidentiality of any individual responses. So any personal identifiable information cannot be given out by the Census Bureau at all. They can't be given to private organizations, they can't be given to the media, they can't be given to other government agencies. So the Census Bureau cannot share that information with ICE. They cannot share that information with Customs. They cannot share that information with anybody, not even with a court order. So I think that when we talk about distrust of the government and the use of this information, it's really rooted in a real space. And things have changed now, and I think communicating that shift, communicating that change, communicating that this policy that was enacted in 1954 hasn't actually ever been violated, is available for folks. And so I just think that that's really important when we talk about messaging, when we talk about making people feel safe. And in addition, at the Massachusetts Census Equity Fund and a lot of grassroots groups have been in conversation with different lawyering nonprofit groups and state lawyers talking about if this information was violated, what protections do we have, who would be bringing forward suits. So there has been already big conversations, not just is there this more recent history of there not being an abuse of information, but in addition, we have been working here in this space to make sure that if any abuse does occur, we will be able to have some grounds to move forward and remedy that. So I think that that's the bulk of what I'm going to be talking about, and now Beth's going to be talking about what y'all can do.
Okay, great. So I know, so that is a brief overview of what's happening with the 2020 census. We know that there are some pretty significant challenges. So every 10 years, we know that many communities that I'm sure many of you work with go undercounted. Communities of color are undercounted, immigrant communities, precisely because some of the language access issues go undercounted. Young children under the age of 5, particularly Black and Latinx children, go undercounted, and that means that many school districts, that many of the Title I school districts have a undercount of the number of kids in those schools for 10 years straight. A lot of young people who move around a lot, young renters are undercounted. We can all think of a place like Alston and all of the U-Haul trucks every September, right? It's when there's a rotating cast of characters in an apartment. It is difficult to count people, and even more so in places that are getting more and more expensive. We know that many families are doubling or even tripling up. I know that almost every immigrant household has put 4 or 5 people into a 1-bedroom apartment when they probably shouldn't. And so renters are often very undercounted. People with limited English proficiency are undercounted, and then finally, households who are headed by a single female are often undercounted as well. How many of you see your clients, your constituents, or your base reflected in these historically undercounted communities? And when we think about the monopoly money decisions, we absolutely want accurate data so that policymakers don't undervalue our people. In addition, because the census self-response will primarily happen online for the first time in 2020, we know that this creates challenges for people who are already historically undercounted. For many people, for everyone who has gone on their phone during this workshop, or anyone watching the live stream, it's probably not a huge deal for us to access broadband and then fill out a form online. For people who already were hard to count, because they're low income, they're immigrants, etc., the move to online makes it that much more difficult to administer a public good. And there are 338,000 households in Massachusetts that do not have broadband access, and that even includes a mobile data plan. Many of the households lacking broadband are in Western Massachusetts, but 16,000 of those are actually in Suffolk County, in the hardest to count census tracts already, right? These are the lowest income parts of Boston. This is Upham's Corner. This is Lower Roxbury. These are areas that are low income, and lots of people lack broadband access. And then there's the chilling effect of the citizenship question. I know that we mentioned the broader political climate of fear and distrust. I think because so much of the media has been about the citizenship question, there's a lot of misinformation that the citizenship question is still on the census form. We won that battle, and the citizenship question will not appear on the 2020 census. However, we know that the workplace raids, the public charge rule, and then the heightened rhetoric during the 2020 presidential election will cause people to feel fear and distrust in the federal government, and that's why nonprofits play such an important role in communicating the importance and confidentiality of the 2020 census. So there are many, many things that nonprofit organizations can do to get out the count. So our approach at Mass Counts, at the Census Equity Fund, at the statewide Complete Count Committee, and more, is that our common goal across every one of these organizations and networks is we want a 100 out of 100 complete count. Everyone wants every member of every community to be counted once and in the right place in the spring of 2020. The way that our organizations have approached achieving that complete count is by relying on trusted leaders in every community to then talk to their neighbors, their fellow congregants, other parents in public schools, and more about the importance of the census and why it's safe to take the census. And at the statewide Complete Count Committee, the Census Equity Fund, and at Mass Counts, we're all very interested in how we can then leverage all of these conversations that we'll have with our neighbors and more for long-term capacity and power. Because we know that this is an important opportunity to seize, and through building all of the relationships, grounding those relationships and conversations about what our communities deserve and the opportunity that's in front of us of the kind of world that we want to live in for the next 10 years, we have a tremendous opportunity to build long-term relationships, power, and capacity. And so now I will turn it over to you all to have short conversations at your tables about who your people are and what are the most effective ways of reaching them as trusted leaders and as community nonprofit leaders. So we'll take a few moments and then we'll come back. Oh, wait. So right now we're talking about the census operations. This is how the operations work. So first, households will receive a, here we go. Okay, so in mid-March of 2020, households will receive a letter with a unique identifier number that say, we invite you to fill out the census at 2020census.gov. Your number is 12345. And then you as a head of household will go to 2020census.gov, fill out 12345. They'll know this is the number that corresponds to this address. They will try to mail you 5 or 6 times until you finally fill out the 2020 census. After you have not filled out the 2020 census by mid-May, then they will send someone to your door to say, fill out, head of household at this place, fill out the census. I'm here. I have a tablet and fill it out on this tablet. So if you're a very private person, you really should fill it out online if you don't want someone to knock on your door. Does that clarify your question? Okay. But they're not mailing you a paper form. They used to, right? That's how self-response used to work, but the Census Bureau is trying to cut costs, which is why they want 70% of people to fill out online. Yes. Wow. Okay, so we are going to take a few moments to talk at your tables about who are your people and how can your organization help get out the count. Back, and let's have a few people report out. Who are your people, and how will you make sure that they get counted?
Hi, my name is Athena, and I'm with Massachusetts Organization for Addiction Recovery, and we talk to people in recovery, families, and allies, and we are those people that we're talking to, so we have a lot of trust with just that, and when we're throughout the state, and so we were just talking about that here and how people trust us in our communities, and that's it. And we're just going to do what we learned today and how important that is, and when this exercise here and how important that is. And
if you have an office where some of those hard to count people will come, it is totally appropriate and good for you to contact people from the Census Bureau. From the Census Bureau. There are partnership specialists across Massachusetts who absolutely should be working with all of your organizations to get out the count. Is there anyone else who wants to share who are your people and how will you make sure that they count?
So I want to share a question that we had at our table in terms of the code that you have. Like we were talking about if we could do street outreach, if we could be out with a cart and stopping people who don't even necessarily go to local nonprofits or senior centers, who would need to be there so that folks could actually do the census right away if they don't know what their number is?
Right, so you actually don't need your number to fill out the census, so you actually can put in your address, but the address and the code match with each other, and it is a little bit, I think it's easier for their database if you use the code, but it's not necessary. So if you have computers at your office and you want people to fill out the census right on the spot, they don't need their unique identifier number, although it is helpful for deduplicating. Any other ideas of who your people are and how you could get out the count?
One person in our group had an idea of, with TS&E Mission Works, of talking to IT to include in our signatures some information about the census, so it kind of gets spread out that way.
Yeah, definitely. So if you are sending lots of emails to partner organizations that work with historically undercounted constituencies, put like the census is coming, talk to me about the census or something like that.
People like to have parties, so you need to have a census party, have some food, and you can come sing. It'd be nice.
Yes. Census Day 2020 is April 1st. You can definitely have a Census Day party if you would like. But there are a lot of amazing ways that community organizations have raised awareness in very fun and culturally relevant ways in the past, whether it's throwing community fairs that are attractive to people with children and to families and more. Those are all great ways to get out the count. Okay, so there are a lot of things that nonprofits can do, including partnering with community organizations, service providers, and other trusted voices to get out the count. You can help recruit Census Bureau enumerators and staff. They need to hire thousands of people in Massachusetts who are hopefully trusted by community members. How many of you have someone in your constituency who could use a part-time flexible job that starts at $25 per hour in Suffolk County? Yes. So when people who are known in the community talk to their neighbors about the census, it is way more likely that people in their communities will actually fill out the census. You can join your local complete count committee. VOTCity has way more information about this. Or you can join, or you can join a subcommittee of the statewide complete count committee if you work with a specific constituency that is historically undercounted. And then finally, you can become a partner of Mass Counts, which brings together nonprofit organizations to mobilize for the 2020 census. And then finally, there are a handful of resources that we wanted to point out. The first are some national resources. One is to look at what the self-response rates were in your community in 2010. And if you see that lots of people did not fill out the census in 2010, that probably means that you have a couple of months to figure out what your plan is to increase the self-response rate in 2020. There are also tons of materials, including a very comprehensive toolkit at censuscounts.org. There are a lot of resources in Massachusetts.
There are a lot of resources in Massachusetts, and the Secretary of Commonwealth has a plethora of information there, especially ones that they chose from the Census Bureau that may work really well here in our community. There's also the Massachusetts Census Equity Fund. As Jasmine said, they're going to be opening the resource. It's been open? Okay, there's a list of resources that the nonprofits have been creating, and that's available to everyone. Mass Counts has a lot of information, and the pledge cards have been replicated throughout Massachusetts. And that's a really great way of ensuring that we are able to connect with our constituents is through these pledge cards. They're very simple. If you would like to hand them out at your organizations, Beth is the person here. They're translated in different languages. And then as far as the statewide complete count committee, we'll have resources available for folks. The toolkits will be coming out tomorrow. So if you want something very specific to Massachusetts, pretty straightforward information, some FAQs that you have asked here today that you'd like to share with your staff, you can email us and we can get that to you. So it's just going to be a quick link to a Google folder, and you can download it and use any of that information that you receive.
Great, so thank you so much for coming, and we will stick around for lunch for a little bit where you can ask us more questions, and I will turn it back to Trina to give us more instruction.
Thank you. What an incredibly important conversation, right? I mean, it may not have all the sexiness of what we're used to, but it's incredibly, incredibly important. And we can layer on everything that we've talked about for the last day around the equity and inclusion. I mean, it's all here. So thank you, all of you, for the session. Lunch